an expression especially today, among young people. Don't be so judgmental. You ever hear that? Don't be judgmental. I said, I'm being judgmental. You have 20 people seeing a person taking a knife and stabbing a person and killing him. He allegedly killed him. Yeah. They see a person, a purse snatcher. He allegedly stole. He pushes somebody into the tracks in front of an oncoming train. He allegedly threw him into the tracks. I'm not saying what you say he's guilty, but it's not alleged. You saw him. Now the question is, presenting him in court, there's so many aspects of how to process that information. Maybe it was a stable, the person who pushed him in. Maybe it was an accident, but factually pushed him in. The question is, what was behind that act? Inadvertent, deliberate, or who knows what? Maybe he was unstable, but he did it. But don't be so judgmental. And today, in terms of people, all kinds of people, the moment you are critical about something, point out a failing, people shut down. They're not open to what you have to say. Once they see you in that light, that you're coming with a critical eye of that person or that whatever may be, they're not receptive to what you have to say. So you have to, it's like an art how to somehow skirt all those issues, come in, and then once you have that credibility, then maybe you can talk about it. Hillel says, don't pass judgment on your fellow until you're in his place, until you arrive where he is at. What does it mean? Previously, it says you should not believe in yourself until you die. People, they don't believe in yourself. I achieved this. But you realize nothing is necessary forever, whether it's financial, whether it's material, or whether it's spiritual. You're not guaranteed that tomorrow you're not going to fall off the cliff. The evil inclination could hoodwink you in a way to convince you day is night and night is day. You may become a progressive. Who knows? Larry may become a conservative. You never know. Anything's possible. Every person can go in many ways because there's so many aspects of influence and why people see things, and you never know. Person says, I will never change. There's no such thing as never. You never know. The only time you know where a person's at is when he dies. Because once he dies, it's over. That we had yesterday, Al-Tamid Basma ad Yom Moso. Don't believe in yourself until you pass away, because only then could we quantify that person's life. Until then, you could quantify the moment, but what's going to be, how it's going to end, you have no idea. So Rabbeinu Yonah explains, don't pass judgment on your fellow until you reach his position. Maybe the only reason why you see him in that light is because you see yourself in another light. But you realize if you switch places with him, you may be more guilty than he is. You may be more vulnerable than he is. I'll give you an example. A person, unfortunately, is poor. He has very serious problems, just maintaining himself. And the person goes and steals. Or the person has anger. Or the person has a tantrum. It's inappropriate behavior. But maybe if you'd be in his position, with all the problems he has, maybe you'd be no better than him. Maybe you'd be worse than he is. So you're in your ivory tower because you believe you're in your ivory tower forever. What happens if you fall out of that ivory tower and you fall on your head and you're ashamed to show your face and you're not upbeat? People say, why aren't you upbeat? They got one who's upbeat because he's on top of the mountain. It's easy to be upbeat. The man who never made it up the mountain, it's not so simple. So why so critical? No, he should go get psychological help. You know, it's not good to be so down. It's true. But maybe if you'd be there, you'd be worse than him. And he doesn't have a medical issue or psychological issue. He's just weighted down by his problems. So part of passing judgment on another person is because you believe your predicament is forever. But if you would take into consideration that what you hear today may not be tomorrow, you're not going to pass judgment so easily and so quickly on the other person. By a Mormon, and the book was a phenomenal book. This person had a PhD in industrial psychology. He was a Mormon, and he told over a story that this man gets on the train about 2 a.m. with 3 or 4 of his children, and he just spreads himself out on the subway seat, and his kids are hanging from the rafters on the train, running around, holding on, swinging. Father just closes his eyes. He's oblivious of this. This person's watching it, and he's starting to get heated up, upset. How does a man just lie down there and let his kids just run wild on the train? There are other people on the train, even though it's, I said 1 or 2 a.m. First of all, what he's on the train with kids 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. Secondly, you close your eyes and you're oblivious. How do you, how irresponsible could you be? So finally, he couldn't take it any longer. He runs over father and he gives him an argument. What kind of father? You're totally responsible, this, that. And he really laces into him. So the man says, the man who's stretched out with his eyes closed, he says, my children, just lost their mother. She died at the hospital. We're just returning from the hospital. The moment he said that, the person was stunned. He says, I'm sorry to hear it. I understand this, that. So what he saw as the most extreme level of irresponsibility, in one moment, because of what he shared with him, he says, I understand. I'm sorry for being critical, seeing it wrongly. You see how quickly that changed? Even though we're not saying something which is so remote, so far-fetched, I mean, there's a basic level of behavior. But still, it just gives you an example how you have to give the other person the benefit of the doubt, because you never know why things are the way they are. That was one of the examples he gave in the book. On El Al, very often you have people, they pray on the plane. You go to Israel and you have to have a minyan on the plane in the back. And very often, it's very hard to find the 10th person. You find 8 people, so people go around the plane looking for an observant person. Maybe you want to join the minyan, okay? Somebody's sitting in business, and he's wearing a black suit, not a kippah, black yarmulke, and he's reading a secular book. And they say to him, would you want to pray with us? He says, I'm preoccupied. And I can't pray with you. Okay, that's it. Dismisses them. They can't get that. They have 9. They need a 10th man. Again, they come back to him and says, please help us out. You're the 10th person. He says, I'm sorry, I can't pray with you. Meaning he's involved reading this book. Finally, the man says, you look like an observant person. You look at this. How do you just turn your back on this? What kind of joy? What happened? This person was accompanying his mother to Israel for burial. The law is that before the interment of the person is not permitted even to answer amen on a bracha. He's not permitted to participate. So he said to him, when he really got angry, I'm sorry, I can't. Halachically, I'm not permitted. Because he's an onain. Onain is that state. That was it. You look like a religious Jew. How do you not join? He's reading an English book. That was the answer. But again, I mean, the man himself should have understood himself. That's the only possible reason why a man who looks like that is not joining. But people are so into their own thing, they don't look beyond themselves. If I need it, you should participate. So they don't even consider the other person, what the other person's situation is. Many spectrum. We're talking about autism. There's a whole spectrum of autism, and there's all kinds of classifications of people. And I know somebody, they have a child. The child must be 4 or 5 years old. This child, I mean, should be put in an institution. It totally consumes the parents' lives. The parents literally, they have to hold him down to control him. Otherwise, he wrecked the house. And with other people, he goes around, sometimes he bites people. So I was once in a location, he comes to me and he starts like pulling my pants leg, this and that. I didn't know his condition. Thought he's just an unruly kid. So I held him. Then he couldn't, he wanted to hit me. I held his hands till he started to cry. So I said to my wife knew the family. I said, well, what's this all about? Says the kid is impossible. He has an autistic condition. And really, the parents are totally consumed with this. I'm not the one to tell them to put him in an institution. But the child, with all the medication, they cannot deal with him. Unless he's asleep, he's impossible to deal with. Am I the one to tell him what to do, what not to do? It's a different discussion. Different discussion. Many years ago, there was a certain person, he didn't have easy life. And he had an ego, the equivalent of Mount Everest. This guy had an ego. And everybody played up to his ego. Played up to his ego. Why? Because many years ago, he lost his wife and eventually remarried. The marriage wasn't great. And people had pity on him. And he was a person who was dying for recognition. And people would praise him and this and that. And he wasn't Talmud Chacham, but he had many personality flaws. And when I pray, I'm very careful not to speak when you're not supposed to speak. And I'm very sensitive when other people speak and disturb the service. Okay? And I was an Avos that year. I lost my mother that year. And I was sitting, when you're an Avos is supposed to change their seat. Not supposed to sit in the regular seat for the year to show that you're displaced. And I'm sitting on the table where this person sits. And when you should not speak, he's speaking. It could be Chazor Sashatz, repetition. It could be in the middle of Kriyas Torah. He's talking. Whatever he's talking, it's relevant. You talk Torah, but you're not permitted to talk. So I go and I first motioned him like this, put my finger on my mouth, that he should keep quiet. Doesn't stop. So I shush him, that he should keep quiet. He looks at me askance. Who am I to tell him not to talk? I go over to him afterwards. I say, no, you really shouldn't speak. You're disturbing people. Totally ignores me. So somebody comes over to me, a person who's a friend of his, who placates him, says, you realize the guy doesn't have an easy life, and the guy this, and person, this and that. Let him talk. I said, let me ask you a question. If somebody comes to your house, and you invite him, and he's a person that, and you feed him, you host him, and every time he eats in your house, he regurgitates, he vomits the food all over your house, and he soils your house. He has a condition. He has reflux, which is uncontrollable reflux. Are you going to invite the man to your house? It's not his fault. But you know something? If you're going to regurgitate and vomit, do it somewhere else, not in my house. It's the same thing. If the man has a problem, his problem can't become everybody's problem when he disrupts the service. That's what I said to him. There was another person. He had a friend, and he has only one son, raises him with his wife very nicely, and he has a son, a friend that comes where they used this term, he spoke like a drunken sailor. Every word that comes out of his mouth is profane language. And whenever the friend comes to this person's house, his wife cringes. And they have a little boy then, he was like 4 or 5 years old. And his wife's upset. I mean, how do we allow a child to be exposed to this kind of language? So his wife calls me up. says, look, Rabbi, could you intervene and speak to my husband? Because he feels it's a good friend of his and he cannot disinvite him. So I called him up. I said, look, well, I want to ask you a question. Factually, the man's coming to your house. You have certain rules. If he come to your house every time, he break all your furniture. Like you let him in the house because he's a good friend of yours. He's damaging your furniture. He's bringing havoc on your family. Don't you think your wife's feelings and your child not being influenced negatively? Don't you think it's as important as not breaking furniture? You set rules in the house. You come to my house, you have to speak as an ordinary person, not with profanities. It's not acceptable. You want to speak that way? You're not invited. You want to go out to a restaurant together and talk? We'll talk there, but not on my own. That's it.